Cherry stood in her cozy kitchen, the aroma of sizzling pork chops filling the air. The sun streamed in through the window, casting a warm glow over the room as she prepared a simple yet delicious meal. She placed the pork chop on a plate next to a steaming pile of fluffy rice and a bowl of fresh, juicy fruit. Cherry smiled as she admired the sight of her homemade meal. The golden brown pork chop glistened, the rice was perfectly cooked, and the fruit looked so refreshing and appetizing. She took a deep breath, savoring the heavenly aroma before sitting down to enjoy her breakfast. As she took her first bite, Cherry closed her eyes in pure bliss. The flavors of the pork chop, seasoned to perfection, combined with the softness of the rice and the sweetness of the fruit, created a symphony of taste in her mouth. She savored each bite, relishing the simple yet satisfying meal she had prepared for herself. With every mouthful, Cherry felt a sense of contentment wash over her. She could hear the birds singing outside her window and the sound of the occasional car passing by. This moment, eating her breakfast alone at home, was a welcome respite from her busy schedule. She took her time, enjoying each bite and feeling grateful for the peace and simplicity of her morning routine. Cherry decided to spend her morning relaxing in front of the television and watching a movie. She settled on Twister, a classic film from 1996 about storm chasers trying to capture dangerous tornadoes on film. As she watched the movie, she marveled at the special effects and the thrill of watching the characters chase after massive tornadoes. As the movie progressed, Cherry found herself completely engrossed in the storyline. She watched with bated breath as the storm chasers pursued the tornadoes across the open plains, her heart racing as they faced the dangers of the storm. The chemistry between the characters and the intense action scenes had her on the edge of her seat, fully invested in the story unfolding on the screen. As the movie continued, Cherry's mind began to wander. She couldn't help but think about how her life compared to the exciting and dangerous world depicted on the screen. Although she led a quiet and peaceful life, she couldn't deny the thrill and adrenaline rush the storm chasers must experience as they chased after the powerful tornadoes. Cherry continued to watch the movie, her mind now swirling with thoughts of adventure and danger. She wondered what it would be like to be a storm chaser, chasing after huge tornadoes and documenting their power and beauty. The characters on the screen seemed so daring and fearless, and she couldn't help but envy their courage and sense of adventure. After the movie ended, something inside Cherry stirred. The idea of tornado chasing and the thrill and adventure it promised had ignited a spark of curiosity and excitement within her. As she sat there, reflecting on the film and the characters who chased after tornadoes, she made a spontaneous decision. She was going to go tornado chasing herself. The thought filled her with a mix of excitement and trepidation. She had never done anything so daring and adventurous before. But the appeal of chasing after powerful and awe-inspiring tornadoes was too strong to ignore. Cherry knew that it would be a dangerous activity, but the thrill of the chase and the possibility of witnessing something truly incredible won her over. As the idea of tornado chasing took root in her mind, Cherry began to think about how she could make it happen. She didn't have any equipment or experience, but she was determined to make it work. She knew that there must be resources and guides available online that could help her get started on her dangerous adventure. Cherry realized that if she was truly going to do this, she needed the necessary tools and equipment to ensure her safety and success. She made a mental list of what she needed: a camera to capture the amazing sights, a tripod to stabilize the camera, a laptop to check the weather and radar, and most importantly, safety gear to protect her from potential dangers. Luck was on Cherry's side as she remembered a store nearby that carried everything she needed. It was a sports and outdoor gear store, and she was hopeful that they would have the appropriate equipment she needed for her daring tornado chaser venture. With a newfound sense of purpose and excitement, Cherry got dressed and prepared to go to the store. She grabbed her wallet, car keys, and a small backpack to carry any equipment she might purchase. As she headed out the door, she couldn't help but feel a flutter of nervousness and anticipation in her stomach at the prospect of finally chasing one of nature's most powerful and awe-inspiring phenomena: tornadoes. Cherry got into her car and started the engine, mentally preparing herself for the adventure that lay ahead. She set her sights on the store, knowing that the start of her journey towards tornado chasing would begin with the gear she would obtain there. As she drove towards the store, Cherry couldn't shake the butterflies in her stomach. She was about to embark on a potentially dangerous adventure, but the thrill and excitement of it all far outweighed any fears she had. She imagined herself out there in the open countryside, chasing after tornadoes and capturing them on camera. The thought gave her goosebumps. Within 4 minutes, Cherry had arrived at the store she had mentally earmarked as her destination. It was a large, well-stocked sports and outdoor gear store, and she felt a pang of excitement as she parked her car in the parking lot. She took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, feeling a rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins as she approached the store's entrance. As she walked into the store, Cherry was immediately greeted by the sight of an array of sporting goods, camping gear, and outdoor equipment. The store was bustling with activity, and she could see several customers browsing the aisles and chatting with the store staff. She took a moment to take in her surroundings before making her way to the section that held the camera, tripod, laptop, and safety gear she was looking for. Cherry navigated her way through the store, passing by tents, kayaks, and other outdoor gear, until she reached the section that held the items she needed. As she approached the camera display, her heart quickened with anticipation. She had never taken a real interest in photography before, but the idea of capturing tornadoes on camera felt extremely exciting and nerve-wracking at the same time. Next to the cameras, she found the section for tripods. Cherry had never used a tripod before, but she knew it was essential for stabilizing her camera while filming. She picked up a sturdy, adjustable tripod, feeling its weight in her hands and appreciating its functionality and durability. Next on her list was a laptop. Cherry knew that she needed one to check the latest weather and radar data to see where potential tornadoes were forming. She browsed the laptop display, trying to decide which one would suit her needs best. After a few moments, she settled on a mid-range laptop with all the necessary features for weather tracking and internet access. Finally, Cherry picked up the safety gear. It included a pair of tactical gloves and a tactical shirt and pants, the latter of which, when combined, made her look like she was in the U.S. military. She felt a pang of nerves as she held the gear in her hands. The reality of the dangerous nature of the activity she was about to embark on was hitting her hard. As she walked to the checkout area to pay for her purchases, Cherry took a moment to reflect on what she was about to do. She was about to go tornado chasing alone, venturing out into the open countryside in search of these powerful and destructive storms. The safety gear she had just picked up only served to highlight the potential dangers she could face if she was reckless or unfortunate enough to encounter a tornado up close. Cherry's fear slowly began to dissipate as she remembered her best friend Avatar Thanos, the legendary and powerful immortal hero who was known as the Guardian Protector of the Universe. Being his friend, she knew that she was under his protection, and that thought gave her a sense of confidence and security. She knew that with his divine power, she was under his care, and if anything was to go terribly wrong, he would be there to save her in an instant. With her purchases in hand, and the thought of Avatar Thanos' protection in her mind, Cherry made her way to the checkout area. As she stood in line, she felt a sense of excitement and empowerment growing inside her. She had everything she needed to pursue her adventurous dream of tornado chasing, and the knowledge that she had Avatar Thanos' protection fueling her courage and confidence. Cherry smiled to herself as she waited in line, already imagining herself out there, chasing after tornadoes and documenting their power firsthand. The thought of experiencing the thrill and adrenaline rush of the chase and potentially capturing footage of these natural phenomena was exhilarating, and the knowledge that she had the support and protection of Avatar Thanos added an extra layer of comfort and security to her quest. Finally, it was her turn at the checkout counter. Cherry placed her camera, tripod, laptop, and safety gear on the counter and prepared to pay for her items. She was bubbling with anticipation and excitement, ready to embark on this new adventure and prove herself as a fearless and capable tornado chaser. As the cashier rang up her purchases and she paid for them, Cherry couldn't help but feel a sense of determination and purpose. She had the gear, and she had the protection of Avatar Thanos. Now all she needed was the courage and skill to chase after tornadoes and document them. As Cherry looked up at the puffy clouds, her gaze landed on what appeared to be a giant arm sticking out of one of them, and it was none other than Avatar Thanos. wearing the Infinity Gauntlet as usual, giving her a thumbs-ups as a gesture of encouragement and courage. Cherry's eyes widened in surprise and awe. She couldn't believe that Avatar Thanos, her divine friend and protector, was watching over her and sending her a sign of support and courage. It was as if he knew what she was about to embark on and was encouraging her to be brave and fearless. The sight of Avatar Thanos' giant arm and the gesture he made filled Cherry with a newfound sense of strength and determination. She knew that her guardian protector was watching over her and had given her the signal to proceed with her adventure. She felt empowered and emboldened, ready to chase tornadoes and prove herself as a capable and fearless storm chaser. With her purchases in hand and the sense of courage instilled by Avatar Thanos' gesture surging through her, Cherry stepped out of the store with a renewed purpose. She walked to her car, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement, knowing that her journey towards tornado chasing was about to begin. Cherry placed the camera and tripod in the back of the car, making sure they were secure. After that, she set up the laptop on the dashboard, making it easily accessible for checking the weather and radar data throughout her journey. As she did this, she felt a sense of readiness and anticipation building inside her. She was practically ready for the adventure she was about to embark on. Cherry opened up the laptop and checked the radar, taking a look at the weather patterns and trying to determine where potential tornadoes might be forming. She scanned the display, searching for any indications of swirling clouds or areas of low pressure that could signal the development of tornadoes. As Cherry scanned the radar, she suddenly noticed a storm brewing a few miles south of the town. The colors on the display indicated a dangerous and potentially violent cyclone taking shape, and the reading suggested that it was an EF5 tornado, the most powerful and destructive category in the enhanced Fujita scale. Cherry's heart began to race as she saw the ominous sight on the radar. An EF5 tornado, one of the most dangerous and powerful storms imaginable, was forming just outside of town. She had to make a decision quickly. Should she go after the tornado or not? Cherry didn't hesitate for a moment. The sight of an EF5 tornado on the radar was too tempting to ignore. She was determined to chase this powerful storm and test her skills as a tornado chaser. Without a second thought, she started the car and began driving towards the forming tornado, adrenaline coursing through her veins and excitement building with every mile she traveled. Cherry left the town and drove through the countryside south, the open plains stretching before her as she followed the road that would lead her towards the forming tornado. The journey would take her through the expanse of the countryside, with the potential for stunning and majestic views. But her focus was solely on the storm she was chasing. As she drove, Cherry passed through the beautiful fields. The rolling hills and wide open spaces were a sight to behold, with wildflowers and tall grasses swaying in the breeze. The expansive skies and endless horizons filled her with a sense of wonder and awe, but she had to keep her mind focused on the task at hand, chasing after the EF5 tornado. Despite the scenic views, Cherry knew that she had to stay alert and focused. She kept her eyes glued to the road, watching out for any signs of the tornado's development. The sky was darkening and the air had a charged feeling to it, signs that the storm was only getting stronger and potentially more dangerous. As she continued her journey, Cherry found herself entering the storm. The clouds above her were swirling and tumultuous, and the wind was picking up with intensity. The air was becoming heavy with electricity, and the sky was turning a dark, ominous shade of gray. Cherry could sense that she was close to the location of the forming tornado, and her heart rate increased with every passing second. Cherry kept driving, her eyes darting around as she searched for any signs of the tornado. The wind was picking up, howling and lashing at her car as she pushed on through the storm. She knew that the tornado might appear at any moment, and she had to be ready to capture it on camera when it did. Despite the howling wind and the heavy clouds that darkened the sky, Cherry stayed focused behind the wheel. She looked for any telltale signs of a developing tornado, such as the classic funnel shape or a rotating cloud base. However, as of yet, there was no sign of the powerful storm she was chasing. Cherry continued driving deeper into the storm, her determination unwavering as she looked for any sign of the EF5 tornado. The wind was becoming more intense, buffeting her car and making it harder to remain steady on the road. The air was thick with tension, and the sky was black as night, but still, there was no sign of the tornado she was chasing. Cherry started to wonder if she was in the right place, or if she had missed the development of the tornado somehow. Cherry's eyes widened as she looked to the east side of the road and saw the EF5 tornado finally making contact with the ground. The powerful storm was now fully formed, a swirling colossus of destruction that was tearing through the countryside. The sight was both breathtaking and horrifying, the sheer magnitude of the tornado's power on full display. The EF5 tornado was tearing through a field of wheat, causing chaos and destruction in its path. The once peaceful field was now a scene of devastation, with the tall stalks of wheat being uprooted and sent flying through the air like toys. The sound of the storm was deafening, a low, thunderous rumble that seemed to shake the very ground beneath Cherry's car. Cherry quickly spotted a safe spot to pull over on the side of the road. She slammed on the brakes and brought her car to a halt. Without wasting a moment, she grabbed her camera and set about filming the powerful EF5 tornado as it continued its destructive path through the field of wheat. With her camera in hand, Cherry began to document the EF5 tornado's rampage through the field. The sight of the powerful storm was both awe-inspiring and terrifying as it tore up the landscape with its immense power. She filmed the tornado's path as it decimated the field of wheat, leaving a trail of upheaval in its wake. As the powerful EF5 tornado continued its rampage, it moved towards an abandoned town. The storm tore through the fields, sending clouds of dust and debris swirling behind it. The once quiet countryside was now a scene of devastation, with the tornado wreaking havoc on everything in its path. The abandoned town came into view as the storm drew nearer. The once thriving settlement was now eerily silent, its buildings vacant and windows boarded up. But the tornado didn't seem to care as it bore down on the town, its power growing stronger and more destructive with every passing moment. The powerful EF5 tornado smashed into the abandoned town, its force slamming into the old stores and shops. Windows shattered and walls crumbled as the storm ravaged the buildings, reducing them to piles of rubble and debris. The town was no match for the wrath of the tornado. The once sturdy structures buckled and toppled, their foundations unable to withstand the storm's immense power. The buildings that had once served as a reminder of a thriving community were now broken and destroyed, their remains scattered and unrecognizable. The powerful EF5 tornado continued its destructive path through the abandoned town, smashing into old restaurants that had once served as gathering places for the community. The buildings, weakened by the passage of time and neglect, could not withstand the force of the storm and collapsed under the impact. The restaurants crumbled like sandcastles under the onslaught of the tornado, their walls crumbling and their interiors shattered. The sight of the once thriving establishments now reduced to rubble was a poignant reminder of the power and destructive potential of Mother Nature. The EF5 tornado continued to tear through the abandoned town, its force now strong enough to tear the roofs off of buildings and send them spinning up into the twister. The sight of the swirling debris, caught up in the powerful storm, was both mesmerizing and horrifying, a reminder of the tremendous destructive power that Mother Nature was capable of unleashing. As the tornado churned its way through the town, the debris it had collected, including the torn-up roofs, fragments of buildings, and even large objects like cars, was whipped around it in a dizzying dance of destruction. The town that had once been full of life was now a desolate wasteland, littered with debris and rubble as the powerful storm continued to rage. Cherry kept her distance as she followed the EF5 tornado through the abandoned town, careful to keep a safe distance between herself and the storm while still capturing footage of its destructive path. She had her dash cam set up on the dashboard, which enabled her to document the tornado's progress while keeping her hands firmly on the wheel, ready to react quickly and make a U-turn if the storm suddenly changed course. The powerful EF5 tornado, still charging through the abandoned town, slammed into two old banks, its force tearing through the structures like paper. The impact sent debris flying, and the sound of the collision echoed through the air, a sharp and terrifying testament to the storm's immense power. Cherry watched in awe and confusion as the powerful EF5 tornado continued to tear through the abandoned town, destroying buildings and uprooting everything in its path. As the twister struck the two old banks, tons of cash and coins were suddenly sucked up into the vortex, swirling around like snowflakes in a whirlwind. As Cherry continued to follow the EF5 tornado through the abandoned town, she couldn't help but wonder why there was so much money left behind in the banks. She knew that the town had been abandoned for a long time, but it seemed strange that the banks would still have tons of cash lying around, waiting to be sucked up by the storm. Perhaps there was more to the town's abandonment than she had realized. As she continued to follow the storm, Cherry's mind began to wander, and she pondered if the government had simply forgotten about the money in the abandoned banks when the town was first left to rot. It seemed like a plausible explanation, and yet it still puzzled her why such a large sum of money would have been left behind, waiting to be destroyed by the tornado. As Cherry continued to follow the tornado, she was suddenly startled by a sudden burst of cash that came flying through the passenger window and landed on the seat next to her. She gasped in shock and confusion, wondering where the money had come from and how it had managed to find its way into her car. Cherry stared at the pile of cash on the passenger seat, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. The amount that had been spilled into her car was a staggering total of $255,000 in cash. It was as if she had won a game show cash prize, except this was real, and it had been delivered to her by a powerful storm. Cherry couldn't help but wonder how such a large amount of money had managed to get into her car. Had it come from the banks? Had it been sucked up by the tornado and somehow deposited into her vehicle? Whatever the case, there it was, a pile of cash sitting on her passenger seat, an unexpected and bewildering addition to her adventure. Cherry's mind was racing with questions and confusion, but she knew that there was no time to dwell on the mystery of the cash now. The tornado was still raging in the distance, and she needed to stay focused if she was going to continue documenting its progress. As much as she wanted to stop and figure out how the money had gotten into her car, she knew that she had to keep driving and follow the storm. As Cherry continued to follow the powerful EF5 tornado through the abandoned town, it tore through a series of old warehouses that had once served as storage for votes and election papers. The storm's force was so strong that it ripped through the buildings, scattering the papers like leaves in the wind, and reducing the once sturdy structures to piles of rubble. The sight of the once orderly warehouses, now reduced to chaos and destruction, was a poignant reminder of the power of nature and the fragility of human institutions. Cherry watched in awe and horror as the tornado continued to wreak havoc on everything in its path, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The powerful EF5 tornado continued its destructive path as it struck an old office building, sending debris flying and reducing the structure to rubble. Without skipping a beat, the storm then turned its attention to an old hotel, the force of its impact causing the building to collapse in a heap on the ground. The once majestic hotel was now just a pile of broken concrete and shattered glass, a stark reminder of the storm's tremendous power. Cherry watched from a safe distance as the tornado continued its rampage through the abandoned town, leaving a trail of destruction in its path that seemed almost surreal in its magnitude. Cherry had been following the powerful EF5 tornado for 2 hours, and finally, at 12 o'clock mid-morning, the storm finally died. The twister lost its power and dissipated into the air, leaving behind a trail of destruction in its wake. Cherry breathed a sigh of relief as she saw the tornado vanish from sight. The adrenaline that had been coursing through her body began to fade, and she realized just how exhausted she was from the intense chase she had just been through. Cherry couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration and excitement as the tornado finally dissipated. She celebrated by pumping her fist in the air and letting out a whoop of triumph. The thrill of the chase had been incredible, and she couldn't believe that she had just witnessed such an intense and powerful storm up close. Cherry was also elated to have gotten such valuable footage of the EF5 tornado. She knew that the footage would be crucial for meteorologists studying the storm and understanding its power, and she felt proud to have played a small part in contributing to the scientific community's knowledge of extreme weather events. Cherry took a moment to relax, allowing herself to bask in the afterglow of the exciting chase. Her heart was still racing after the intense experience, but now that the storm was over, she had a moment to catch her breath, and reflect on what she had just been through. As the adrenaline began to wear off, Cherry suddenly realized just how hungry she was. Chasing an EF5 tornado for 3 hours had taken a lot out of her, and she felt her stomach growling with hunger. She knew that she needed to find something to eat and refuel both her body and her energy levels. As she sat in her car, still parked near the spot where the EF5 tornado had finally died off, Cherry began to contemplate where she could get some food. After a quick look at a local map, she discovered a nearby town just 3 miles to the east. Deciding that it would be the perfect place to grab a quick lunch, she started up the car and set off on the short journey. As she drove to the nearby town, Cherry's thoughts were a mix of excitement, exhaustion, and hunger. The thrill of chasing the immense storm was still fresh in her mind, but so was the hunger that had suddenly struck. The thought of finally getting some food was both tantalizing and soothing, and she couldn't wait to arrive in the town and satisfy her growling stomach. When Cherry reached the town, she immediately spotted a fast food joint with a drive-thru. Her hunger pangs had only grown stronger, and the thought of getting a quick and easy meal was incredibly appealing. Without hesitation, she pulled up to the drive-thru window and prepared to place her order. Cherry's hunger had gotten to the point where she ordered an impressively large amount of food, including 10 tenders, 6 wings, 8 french fries, 7 chicken sandwiches, 8 burritos, 4 tacos, and a whopping 30 salads, half of which were fruits. And not just that, she also ordered 20 protein shakes, showing how serious she was about maintaining her health, even while indulging in a large meal. The person taking her order at the drive-thru window looked stunned and slightly overwhelmed by the enormity of the order, but managed to jot down all the items on their order pad. Cherry chuckled to herself, realizing that she might have gone a little overboard with her hunger-driven order, but she didn't care. She was so hungry that nothing else mattered right now but satisfying her rumbling stomach. Cherry was pleasantly surprised when the cashier handed her the total for her sizable meal, only $15. She smiled, thinking that for all the food she had ordered, the price was quite affordable. Maybe this particular fast food joint had some special deal, or maybe she had just hit the jackpot with her timing. Whatever the reason, she was grateful that she could satisfy her hunger without breaking the bank. Cherry found a parking spot nearby and pulled her car into it. She couldn't wait to dig into the massive meal that she had just ordered. The smell of the food wafting through the car was tantalizing, and her stomach was growling even more loudly than before. She opened the large takeout bag and began to unwrap the various containers of food, her mouth watering in anticipation of the feast that awaited her. As she began to unwrap the containers, Cherry was impressed by the sheer amount of food that she had ordered. The tenders, wings, sandwiches, and burritos were all neatly packed and looked delicious. The salads and shakes were also well organized, and she smiled at the thought of having something healthy to balance out the indulgent meal. She couldn't wait to take her first bite and satisfy her ravenous hunger. She grabbed one of the tenders and took a bite, savoring the crispy coating and juicy meat inside. The flavors danced on her tongue, and she let out a satisfied moan. She then reached for a handful of fries, dipped them in ketchup, and popped them in her mouth. The salty, crispy taste was so good that she felt her taste buds celebrating. She continued to work her way through the massive spread, enjoying each delicious bite as she satisfied her hunger. As she continued to eat, Cherry couldn't help but feel a little guilty for indulging in such a large meal, but she quickly dismissed the thought. After all, she had just chased an EF5 tornado for 3 hours straight, and she needed the calories to replenish her energy. She also found herself impressed by how all the food from the fast food joint tasted so good, despite being quick and cheap. She finished the last of her food and collapsed back in her seat, feeling both content and satisfied. The meal had been delicious and filling, and it had definitely hit the spot. As she sat there, savoring the aftertaste of her food, she smiled and felt grateful for the experience she had had today. Chasing the EF5 tornado had been both exhilarating and exhausting, but it had led her to this moment of pure, satisfying pleasure. Cherry was not only satisfied with the amount of food she had ordered, but also thankful that she had included an abundance of salads and protein shakes in her order. Despite the large meal, she hadn't overdone it on the unhealthy food and had also managed to include nutritious and healthy options to balance out the indulgence. She patted herself on the back for being mindful of her health, even in the midst of her hunger-driven feast. She had always been strict about maintaining her health and staying in shape, and she knew that eating junk food, even in the form of fast food, could be detrimental to her fitness goals. But today she had made a conscious effort to balance out the indulgences with nutritious options, and she felt proud of herself for sticking to her principles even when faced with the temptation of a large, tasty meal. As Cherry sat in her car, feeling full and satisfied from her large meal, she opened up her radar to check and see if any new storms were brewing. She always wanted to stay updated on the latest weather patterns, especially after the intense chase she had just been on. She knew that there were always more storms to be chased and documented, and she was eager to see if there was another one forming somewhere that she could head towards before heading back home for the day. As Cherry examined the radar, she spotted a new storm forming further east. To her surprise, this storm appeared to be spawning an EF3 tornado. The sight of the developing storm immediately piqued her interest, and she felt her heart beginning to race at the thought of another chase. As she zoomed in on the radar, she could see the storm's signature beginning to develop, signaling the potential for a powerful tornado to touch down. Her adrenaline began to pump as she thought about the possibility of capturing footage of another intense storm and the incredible raw power of nature. With the location of the new storm in mind, Cherry started up her car and got back on the road. She was determined to make her way east and follow the storm as it continued to develop. The thought of witnessing another powerful tornado up close filled her with excitement and a sense of purpose. As she drove, she kept her eyes peeled on the radar, tracking the storm's progress and mentally preparing herself for the chase ahead. As she drove, Cherry couldn't help but let her mind wander to the possibility of what she might encounter when she reached the storm. She thought about the sights and sounds of the tornado she had just witnessed, and how each storm was unique and fascinating in its own right. She also considered the risks that came with chasing severe weather, but the thrill of the chase and the desire to document the storm's power was stronger than any fear she might have had. With each mile that took her closer to the storm, her heart rate increased and her senses became more alert. She was feeling a mix of excitement, anticipation, and a slight flutter of nerves, but overall, she was ready for what lay ahead. As she made her way further east, Cherry began to see the sky getting darker and darker, signaling the approach of the storm. The once clear and sunny sky was now turning a steely shade of gray. The air felt heavy with moisture and electricity, and Cherry knew that she would get closer and closer to the storm she was tracking on her radar. As Cherry drove further into the storm, she was met with howling winds and driving rain. The sky was now a tumultuous mix of gray clouds and swirling black, and the air felt heavy with tension. The thrill of the chase was now combined with a slight sense of trepidation, as she knew she was now in the midst of the storm and the power of nature was all around her. As she continued to drive, the winds became stronger and more ferocious, buffeting her car and making it difficult to see through the sheets of rain that pelted the windshield. But Cherry was undeterred, and she pressed on, determined to get as close as possible to the heart of the storm and the potential tornado it was spawning. The rain fell harder and harder, and Cherry could hear the sound of hail mixed in with it. The hail drummed on the roof of her car in an almost rhythmic pattern, like a storm of its own. The force of the storm was now quite intense, and she knew that it meant that she was getting closer to the central core of the system, and likely the developing tornado. As Cherry continued through the storm, she kept a vigilant eye on her surroundings, taking in the ever-changing landscape and the power of the elements that surrounded her. The wind was now howling so loudly that it sounded like a freight train, and the rain continued to fall in heavy sheets, obscuring her vision. But she remained steadfast, driving cautiously but determinedly through the storm, looking for any signs of the developing tornado. The landscape was a constantly shifting tableau of gray and black, with trees bent almost to their limit by the force of the wind and driving rain. The hail was now coming down even harder, pinging off the car and creating a sort of natural alarm system to mark her progress further into the storm's center. As Cherry continued to drive through the storm, she suddenly looked to the north and noticed something quite remarkable. There, in a field of tall sunflowers, an EF3 tornado was beginning to take form. The sight of the swirling dervish of wind and debris cutting a path through the vibrant yellow and black petals was a striking and breathtaking contrast to the otherwise gray and ominous surroundings. Cherry's heart raced as she saw the tornado forming, knowing that she was in the right place at just the right time to witness the incredible power of the elements. The tornado was still growing, building up in size and intensity as it spun through the sunflower field, shredding petals and stems in a furious dance of nature's destructive force. As Cherry watched the EF3 tornado, she was completely captivated by the sight. The swirling vortex was like a living, breathing monster, devouring everything in its path. The sound of the storm was now joined by the roar of the tornado, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to shake the very air around her. Cherry knew that she was witnessing something extraordinary, and that the footage she was capturing was going to be absolutely incredible. Cherry pulled her car over to the side of the road, making sure not to get too close to the tornado. She continued filming, her camera trained on the EF3 as it danced violently through the sunflower field, its powerful winds causing the flowers to dance around the vortex in a macabre ballet of destruction. The sound of the tornado was almost deafening now, and Cherry felt the ground beneath her feet shaking with the force of the storm. She kept filming, capturing every angle, every moment of the incredible spectacle unfolding in front of her eyes. Her heart was beating rapidly, but she was determined to stay focused on documenting the storm's power and the beauty of its furious dance. The sunflowers were now being violently ripped from the ground, their yellow petals flying around like tiny pieces of torn paper in the powerful vortex of the tornado. The scene was both terrifying and mesmerizing, and Cherry couldn't tear her eyes away from the incredible display of nature's raw might. As the powerful EF3 storm continued its destructive path, it moved into a nearby field of berry bushes. The bushes, filled with ripe berries, began to dance and thrash violently as the tornado swept over them. The berries, ripe and plump, were wrenched from their stems, flying through the air like a shower of red, juicy raindrops. As the tornado continued its deadly path, it seemed almost unstoppable until it suddenly made a sudden turn and headed straight for a large lake. The water, previously calm and tranquil, began to churn violently as the storm slammed into it, creating monstrous waves that thrashed upon the shores. The force of the storm was so powerful that it sent ripples through the entire lake, its immense energy transforming the once placid body of water into a maelstrom of fury and destruction. As the powerful tornado met the large lake, the water responded in dramatic fashion. The once still lake began to churn and swirl, its surface roiling and frothing as the powerful winds of the storm lashed at it. The lake itself became a mirror of the storm's fury, its water twisting and spinning in a fearsome vortex that echoed the shape of the cyclone above. After wreaking havoc on the berry bushes in the lake, the tornado made its way towards a vast field of pumpkin patches. The orange gourds, fat and ripe, began to bounce and tumble as the storm raged through the field. The wind, driven by the force of the tornado, caused the pumpkins to roll across the ground, like a nightmarish game of marbles. As the tornado continued through the field of pumpkin patches, it picked up more and more of the orange gourds in its powerful vortex. The pumpkins, torn from their vines, were sucked up into the air, swirling around in the churning funnel like a gruesome version of an autumnal twister. Their orange color glistened in the sunlight as they flew through the air, adding a surreal and almost Halloween-like touch to the already menacing scene. After tearing through the pumpkin patches, the powerful tornado found its next target, an apple orchard. The trees, laden with ripe apples, swayed and shook violently as the storm hit them with its full force. The apples, still clinging to their branches, were whipped violently around, flying in every direction like a shower of red and green projectiles. The tornado, which had unleashed its fury on the apple orchard, now set its sights on the building nearby. The building, made of wood and tin, shook with the force of the storm's wind, the metal groaning and creaking as the wind clawed at it. The building's windows shattered, and the roof gave way. The tornado ripping through the structure like a battering ram, leaving it a shattered ruin in its wake. Cherry watched in awe and terror as the tornado tore through the apple orchard and the nearby building. its power and ferocity leaving her breathless. She captured the scene on film, her hands shaking but her mind focused on the task at hand. This was more than just a storm, it was a force of nature, a powerful and unpredictable beast that could destroy everything in its path. The tornado, still powerful and furious, moved on from the apple orchard and struck a nearby fence with a resounding crash. The fence, made of wood and wire, was no match for the storm's fury, and it was torn to pieces in an instant, its remains tossed and scattered like matchsticks blown by a child. The tornado, now moving again, moved towards an abandoned farm that lay in its path. As the powerful tornado moved towards the abandoned farm, it made a beeline for the old barn. The barn, which had likely been standing for decades, shuddered and creaked under the force of the storm. It tried to stand strong against the onslaught, but the tornado proved to be too strong, and the old barn was blown apart, its roof and walls scattering like leaves before the wind. Cherry, still filming, was amazed by the raw power of the storm. The barn, once a sturdy and solid structure, had been reduced to rubble in a matter of seconds. She continued filming, determined to capture the full extent of the damage that the storm was wreaking on the landscape and the buildings in its path. After demolishing the barn, the tornado turned its attention to the nearby silo, its immense fury not abated. The silo, strong and tall, began to shake and wobble as the tornado slammed into it, its powerful winds assaulting it from all sides. The silo, made of sturdy wood and metal, put up a valiant effort, but it was no match for the furious storm. The silo creaked and groaned as its walls buckled and cracked, and then, with a final ear-splitting crack, it came crashing down, its remains scattering around the farm like a pile of children's blocks. The tornado, its devastating path of destruction showing no sign of slowing, moved towards the boarded-up farmhouse. The farmhouse, with its closed shutters and abandoned look, was no match for the storm's fury. The windows, even though boarded up, shattered under the force of the storm's wind and rain, and the roof began to buckle and bend. The walls of the farmhouse strained to hold up against the onslaught, but like the barn and silo before it, the farmhouse was no match for the power of the tornado, and it started to collapse, its wooden planks and beams falling like dominoes in the storm's wake. As the farmhouse, now starting to splinter and crack under the storm's onslaught, was hit by a powerful burst of wind, parts of the building were wrenched up from its foundations and sucked up into the swirling vortex of the tornado. Roof tiles, bits of wood, and broken pieces of furniture were all torn from the building and whirled into the air by the fierce winds. The already weakened farmhouse continued to shudder and groan under the force of the storm, and as the tornado struck even harder, the roof was torn off and sent spiraling up into the air. The sky, already dark and ominous, was now painted with pieces of roof tile, and the walls of the farmhouse, now without a roof, seemed even more vulnerable and exposed. After dealing a devastating blow to the farmhouse, the tornado began to weaken and start to die out. The howling of the winds began to subside, and the spinning vortex started to slow. The storm, which had wreaked havoc on the farm and its buildings, began to move away, its fury slowly diminishing as it continued its path through the countryside. Cherry, her adrenaline pumping and her heart racing, celebrated after capturing the footage and data the meteorologists needed to study the storm. The footage she had captured was incredible, showing the power and destructive force of the storm in a way that words alone could not convey. She knew that the meteorologists would be able to use the data to help predict future storms and warn people of impending danger. Cherry couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment as she watched the remnants of the storm fade away into the distance. The footage she had captured was powerful and impactful, and she knew that it would make a difference in helping people understand and prepare for the power of nature. As she drove away from the storm, she couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and respect for the power of nature, and a renewed sense of purpose and determination to continue documenting its fury. After capturing the footage, Cherry transferred it from the camera to her laptop. She then composed an email to the National Weather Service, attaching the incredible footage she had taken of the storm. With a sense of urgency and purpose, she clicked send and sent off the email, knowing that the meteorologists would be able to use the footage to study the storm and better understand its behavior. Cherry felt a sense of satisfaction and happiness as she reflected on the footage she had captured of the earlier EF5 tornadoes and the EF3 she had just filmed. The power and fury of the storms, captured on film, was incredible, and she knew that it would be valuable in studying and understanding the behavior of these violent storms. The thought of being able to help scientists and meteorologists learn more about tornadoes and their destructive capabilities made her feel proud and fulfilled. After sending off the footage to the National Weather Service and taking a moment to reflect on her incredible day, Cherry started up her car and made a U-turn to head back home for the evening. She was feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration as she drove, her mind replaying the events of the day in her head. The tornadoes she had witnessed and documented had been both beautiful and terrifying, and she knew that she would treasure the memories and the footage forever. As Cherry continued driving, the adrenaline from the day's events began to wear off, and she started to feel the exhaustion from the drive start to set in. She had been driving for over 6 hours now, and the long journey home was starting to take its toll on her. She put on some music to help keep herself awake and keep focused on the road. After another 15 minutes of driving north, Cherry started to see the familiar sights of town come into view. The streetlights, the storefronts, and the houses of her neighborhood looked cozy and inviting after the long drive. She knew that she was almost home, and the thought of a hot shower and a soft bed was starting to feel more appealing with every passing minute. As she drove through her neighborhood, Cherry noticed that it was strangely quiet and empty. The streets were mostly vacant, and there was a stillness in the air that felt a little eerie. She started to feel a slight sense of unease, but she shook it off and reminded herself that it was just her tiredness getting to her. She pulled into her driveway and turned off the engine, relieved to finally be home. As she stepped out of the car, Cherry took a moment to stretch her legs and take in the familiar sights and smells of her home. The garden was well tended, and the house looked cozy and inviting in the soft light of the street lamps. She grabbed her bags and camera footage and started towards the front door, feeling a sense of relief and comfort at being back in her own space. As Cherry entered her house and made her way upstairs, she noticed how quiet it was. The creaking of the stairs and the sound of her footsteps echoed through the empty house and created an almost eerie atmosphere. She reached the top of the stairs and headed towards her bedroom, feeling a little more uneasy than usual, but still brushing it off as exhaustion from the long drive and the events of the day. Cherry got changed into her comfortable pajamas, feeling the soft fabric against her skin. She placed her precious camera footage on the bedside table and her crown beside it. She then headed towards the bathroom to brush her teeth and get ready for bed. As she stood in front of the sink, Cherry went through the familiar motions of brushing her teeth, her mind starting to wander as the monotonous task lulled her into a sense of comfort and familiarity. Despite the slight uneasiness she felt earlier, she was starting to relax and feel sleepy. Once Cherry had finished brushing her teeth, she picked up her crown from the bedside table and carried it to the bathroom. She filled the sink with warm water and added a bit of jewelry cleaner, then carefully placed the crown into the water to soak. After letting it sit for a few minutes, she grabbed a soft cloth and gently started to clean and polish the crown, admiring its beauty and craftsmanship as she worked. The task of cleaning and polishing her crown helped to take her mind off her earlier uneasiness, and she started to feel a sense of contentment and peace as she worked. She meticulously cleaned every inch of the crown, taking her time to ensure that every detail was perfect. Soon, the crown was sparkling and clean, looking almost as good as new. Cherry lay in bed, and as her head hit the pillow, she closed her eyes and let out a deep sigh. The exhaustion from the day's events and the long drive home started to take its toll, and she could feel her body relaxing and her mind starting to drift into sleep. Soon, she was fast asleep, dreaming of tornadoes and the thrill of capturing them on film. As Cherry slept, the house was quiet and still, the silence only broken by the soft sounds of her breathing and the occasional creaking of the old house settling. The night outside was dark and quiet, and the neighborhood was blissfully unaware of the incredible footage that Cherry had captured earlier in the day.